Welcome back. I'm Michael Bull, and this is America's Commercial Real Estate Show. This segment is brought to you by my company, Bull Realty Asset and Occupancy Solutions. Visit bullrealty.com. We have a very important topic for you today. That is wellness. We're talking to Judith Webb. She's Executive VP with International Well Building Institute, and you can get your building certified as a well building, right? So talk to us about that and the levels and how we'd go about it.
So your audience understands better than most that you have buildings and you have interior spaces. Sometimes they're part of the same thing and sometimes they're part of two different universes, right? So to certify your building, we have a program called Well Core and Shell. And you can certify your Well Core and Shell against the well building standard, and you can achieve silver, gold, or platinum level. And in the building, the certification for the building itself, we pay a lot of attention to the mechanical systems, to the building lighting availability, and the finishings, the paint, the things that might cause a toxic reaction on the inside. Then you can also have a certification for new and existing interiors. And we find tenant fit out gets to be very important in that category. A lot of times, we all know these gorgeous new skyscrapers that we're building every day have a number of tenants, and every tenant has a different view of the world. Yeah. But the tenant fit out can also be done in conjunction with the landlord, obviously, in a way that allows the more refinement of some of the other features that might be uniquely important to the tenant. Say, for instance, you're a high-tech company. So you need spaces that allow your coders to flourish, even though the work itself is very centered on a computer, right? So the lighting is going to be critically important. So you can choose features that maximize the lighting that works best for someone who's in a coding zone during the day or during the night. You can choose air quality. You can bump up the CO2 or take down the CO2 depending on what the external air quality is coming in. You may want to balance it a little bit differently during the day. You can also think about what you want those people to do when they need something to eat, when they need something to drink. And instead of having those high sugar content drinks in the cooler, better to have water, better to have snacks that are healthier, because if you're quote unquote in the zone as a technology coder, you just will reach for whatever's convenient.
Right.
So you change your behaviors because it's easier than it is to do the wrong thing. So we include that in our nourishment section. We include things that are maybe a little counterintuitive, like serving size, cup size, bowl size, because the larger you have, the more you're going to put in it, and your mind doesn't parse that down. But if you help your employees make better decisions, that's also very helpful.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the air, because I think the air quality, because I think most people would not know when they're looking at space for their business, how do they know the air quality of a building?
So one of the things that is unique about the well building standard is that before you can be certified, you have to go through a process called performance verification. They had it right, trust but verify. That's what certification is all about, is having a third party, and in our case it's the Green Business Certification Inc., to actually come in with equipment and test for a variety of contaminants and make sure that there's nothing lurking that you're not aware of, or if something is introduced in the process of your fit out that you weren't aware of. I'll give you a great example. I was at an opening of a showroom several years ago of a company that prides itself on being very sustainable. But once we walked in the door, you couldn't hardly be in the room because in the space adjacent, they were laying carpet with or tile, and were laying the glue, and the high VOC content was just really hard. So the things that get introduced sometimes out of your control once you register them, you know what to do about them. So many things aren't like that. You can't smell them and you can't see them. The other thing that's great is the technology that has been inspired by this whole movement to wellness has been very focused on improving indoor air quality. There are a number of companies who are doing sensors that actually on a real-time basis give you readings into a dashboard so you can see what the levels are, and you can make minute adjustments even during the day to make sure that your employees are getting the right kind of air that's not going to make them sick. We know this is important because there's a number of really important studies that have come out recently, one from Harvard on the effect of CO2 on cognition. And they've proven that very small changes in how much CO2 is in a room can have a very direct effect on what you remember, on how you concentrate. I mean, these are high-level, clinical-level trials. And when you begin to see that kind of research, you begin to go, wow, maybe there really is something to this. So having those sensors, being able to do that performance verification is critical.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important things. You know, we are what we eat, we are what we breathe, right?
Sure, absolutely.
What about water? You mentioned water is one of the wellness aspects. How does that work in an office building for a tenant?
Well, mostly that's about accessibility. We find ourselves in a circumstance. You remember the water fountains in the high school, right? Mm-hmm. That's not exactly your best place to be. But water that has high filtration levels, water that can be filtered both in the plant of the building as well as in the tenant space in the building, that double filtration can be important. And water is different everywhere. The quality of water that comes into the building is different. So being able to assess what that is going in and making very cautious judgments about the kind of filtration you need to make sure that employees get what they need. That's critically important.
Okay.
We also know, just as a side note, water is probably the largest user of electricity to transport and clean water in our infrastructure across America. So as we think about the holistic balance of the planet, the less energy we have to use to clean our water, the less greenhouse gases we put into the air. It's part of a cycle, and that's that whole holistic part of how we need to approach that.
Yeah, so it's important that our tenants and employees have access to water, and it's clean water. So I guess that means I'll have to get rid of the beer taps in my office now and put water back in there.
Okay, but mindful fun is equally important. Just saying.
And you mentioned light, and it seems like lighting, healthy lighting was expensive. It seems to be coming down in price a good bit. Where's some good information about what lights we should use? Because we can now change even our fluorescent fixtures with better lighting, right?
So there are a number of companies that are beginning to, well, let me take one step back. There was a time when we really didn't have a choice about light, right? Yeah. 60-watt normal light bulbs. Now we went through the CFL phase and the LED phase, but the whole idea of circadian rhythm lighting is new, but it is making a powerful impact. There are a number of companies out there that are beginning to provide measurement where you can go in and you can say, here's my square footage, here's the number of employees, here's essentially the hours that they work, give me a solution. That's been really a very popular way to get people to understand that circadian rhythm lighting is important. Another place to use to understand the science behind that is the fact that it's a pretty new discovery. As a matter of fact, there's a television commercial that's on now talking about someone who's blind and how that because the optic nerve where the circadian sensor sits, that they have an intrinsic way of having that affect their sleep patterns, whether they can see or not. So it is becoming a place where we can spend a lot of energy and investment to make sure that our biological systems are in sync with the lights around us. Yeah. But that's not to also say anything bad about daylight, because daylight is critically important, and having windows that give you that kind of light, but activities that reduce glare for the comfort features. Those are important. Again, it's a holistic system. And in the performance verification process, we look at the light for an entire cycle to make sure that the kind and the color and the quality of light is what is at optimum for your employees.
Yeah, and I think some people may not, when you start thinking about it, it makes sense. But you may not think about how much light impacts you. Like in my office, it's really dark, and they have me in a chair with a 200-watt light bulb just right above my head, and they're asking me questions all the time. I don't know what's going on. No, but you think about it, and there's some offices, even in my space, that like we're in a studio now, we have very expensive LED lighting, we can adjust everything, and even though we're well lit, it doesn't bother my eyes at all. But I can go in one of our conference rooms, we haven't changed our lighting out yet, and I can be in there and I'll start blinking, I'm uncomfortable. Sometimes you may not realize why you're uncomfortable.
Exactly.
And why you're not productive.
Exactly. That's why there's so much science behind the well building standard. You have to, if you can't, you have to find a way to make the invisible actionable. And if you can't measure it, if you can't put your hands around what you have, you don't know what to do with it. So that's why we depend highly on a very engaged research community, both from the academic side and from another level of institutional side, where there's even product research going on, to make sure that as the wellness movement takes off, there are products that are tracking it, and it's a real innovation driver. There are things in the market today that we didn't have access to 18 months ago that are significantly important to how we are able to implement the well building standard.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the prices have come down so much on everything. So let's talk about that for a moment. So what is the rough difference in cost and time if my company is moving into 10,000 square feet and I'd like to have the best wellness standard I can get? Is there some rough numbers about how much more it'll cost me?
Well, the better way to look at it is what's the value?
What's the productivity increase?
What's the value?
Right.
So let me give you just one example. Structure Tone is a very large, very well-known design and construction firm in New York. Their North American headquarters recently went through well certification, and they are at the gold level. They spent less than 99 cents a person per day, 350 employees, and I forget the exact square footage, it's maybe 25,000 square feet. One-time cost. Think about the impact of that little tiny amount of money on a priceless increase in productivity. That's huge.
Yeah.
You have to think about the linear aspect. There are fees associated with becoming well certified. There's a registration fee. There's a certification fee that involves the performance verification, right? So you bring a bunch of expensive equipment in, test things, make sure that exactly what it is. There's that. There are the fit out costs, and there's everything from standing desk to making sure that you've got the right kind of filters, to making sure you have the right ergonomics. There's a variety of costs. But at the end of the day, you can make a lot of decisions that it's less than a cup of coffee a week for your employees.
Yeah.
That is huge. And the message that sends to your employees is equally huge. And the message that sends to people who want to be your employees, well, instead of somebody else, that's priceless.
Right. And every company that we tenant rep today is involved and concerned about retention, about recruiting, about productivity, about the health of their people. And you may be wondering, if you're listening or watching, what are the costs? What are the improvements in productivity? Well, our next guest is going to get into that. We're going to talk about what are the real returns of wellness, of the certification, so that you can make a decision whether you're a building owner or running a business. Judith, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you being here. So stay with us. That is what's next for you. I'm Michael Bull. Stay with us. This is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.